Yeah, so there's so much in it's funny. I just inhaled my spit.
This is high quality content here, folks.
Mhm.
This is this is Oscar winning podcasting.
Recording in progress.
Recording in progress.
Bamoosing on Tuesday.
There it is.
I went for it.
Bamusing.
It fell flat on its face, though, I think.
No, I don't think. I think turning Bamis into a verb is a worthy. It's a worthy goal, and I think I was going to say this earlier, but I think there's some like linguistically, the connection between I want to make a connection between bamoosing and bemusing.
Ah, I like it. I like it. It's
Be-
kind of like they share a common ancestor language, but their
Yeah,
use is not totally the same. Like in one Romance language, it's, if you're bamoosing, you're bamising. Maybe when we were in college, bamising meant like running lines, working on a
mhm.
role, and being bemused is not completely and utterly divorced from that, but we use it in a different way in our language.
We do, and I mean, there's a really obvious connection between like muse, like the muse. So I would say, Bamis, you are you're a bit of a muse, in that you are the person that I'm doing this podcast with.
I
You're my
didn't.
inspiration.
Oh,
Wait, what'd you
well,
say?
that's I didn't even see the muse thing. I didn't think of like that's clearly the root of that is muse.
Yeah, which I'm sure has some linguistic roots in like probably like the gods of theater. Where do you think where does the muse come from?
That's a great question. I mean, I do you want to look up the etymology of muse, or shall I? Are your hands are your
I'm doing
are
it.
your hand
Adam,
are your hands scissored?
my hands are not scissored,
All
but
right,
my legs are. Just kidding. That was gross. All right.
that was beneath you.
Yeah, it was. Sorry, audience. How many people just unsubscribed? Uh, I just Googled etymology of muse, and it says the origin Greek musa, Latin musa, Old French. It doesn't have a word under Old French. It has Latin and Old French on the same plane. Is there a version of French? Is like French Latin plus whatever like Gaelic language the Gauls spoke? Probably.
I have I have no idea. I could be.
Because
You're
the Roman
this is your territory.
because the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar, when he was out killing native tribes and dominating lands, one of his biggest, things was he went up to what is now called France, and at the time the people there were called the Gauls, and I believe the Gauls are like a linguistic ancestor or linguistically related to like you know the Gaelic, Scottish, Irish, etc. I believe that's a connection, like Northern European, but not Germanic, but probably connected to German. Anyway, I don't know why I'm doing linguistic geography here, but
That's your job, because when I was going to say when it comes to geography and world history, like that's where I draw a big blank on the linguistic thing. So that's why I was hoping you would go there.
oh, nice.
I have a question.
Hmm.
I don't know if you're going to know the answer to this, but I at least want to pose the question because for me, and again, I'm limited in my knowledge of like the ancestry of these things. But normally, when I look up an English word, I'm looking like is this broadly from Latin or is this from one of the others? So like Latin and Greek to me are two different sources for us, but it comes up in both, and that confuses me and bewilders me.
Huh. So, if to add a little context, I don't know how much. I couldn't tell you exactly how much Greek and Latin are related, but Greek definitely lent a lot to Latin because the Greeks were the dominant cultural, they were the dominant culture in the region. They kind of dominated the Mediterranean area, after Alexander the Great. And then when the Romans came around and they conquered the Greeks, they looked up to the Greeks. The Roman pantheon of gods and is kind of very similar to the Greek pantheon of gods. They probably have some things in common. I know that the alphabet, the Latin alphabet, was borrowed heavily from the Greeks. So there's a lot of like in the way that Latin is an ancestor of English. I
Mm.
feel like Greek might be an ancestor of Latin.
That that makes sense. And I remember an Eddie Izzard bit about like when the Greeks showed up with the good gods, because the Romans are like, oh, thank goodness you guys showed up, because we had these crap gods. We had like Steve, the god of furniture, and Jeff, the god of hairdos.
Oh, that's good stuff. Speaking of gods, um, we're watching this show. We're at different parts, but we're watching the Amazon original show, The Boys,
Mm.
which is about superheroes, which are kind of our modern day mythological gods. But it's this very sardonic take on superheroes, and it definitely is a strong comment on the socio-political events of the day. And but also one thing that we've been talking about that I am not as well versed in Marvel and DC, and you're saying you're
Mm.
noticing a lot of things where the boys are not paying homage to, but like you know uh,
Satirizing.
yeah, satirizing. So that's super interesting to me.
Yeah, so there's so much in it's funny. I just inhaled my spit.
This is high quality content here, folks.
Mhm.
This is this is Oscar winning podcasting.
I was texting earlier with Elise, and she was telling me a friend of hers is watching The Boys and wanted to know what season I was on and this and that, and her friend apparently is somewhere in season two and still doesn't like it.
Well,
And
if you're in season 2 of something and you don't like it, you're wasting your time. Like, why? Why would you give it another
but
shot?
I kind of get it, because I was ambivalent about it really until somewhere in season three. I think by the time I got to season three, I was like, okay, no, I do like it. But
You're in
I
season
kind
3?
I'm at the end of season three.
Oh shit! So you're almost caught. I think I'm on season 4. I think the season 4 is the current season, right?
Yeah, I think the latest one is four.
Oh shit! Did you
Um,
really burn through it, or am I just do I not know what kind of flat circle time is?
Either of those things are definitely possible, maybe a combination.
Excellent.
But yeah, there are things about the show that I don't like. Um,
Like what?
well, so I'm really not a big fan of gratuitous nudity or sexual things.
Yeah.
Um, but that doesn't automatically mean that I won't give a show a chance. Boardwalk Empire is a great example of this, because I am a huge fan of that show.
Yeah.
And but here and there's just like loads of nudity and sex stuff where I'm like, you really didn't need that to tell this really interesting actor-driven, story-driven period piece, but it was on HBO, and it's like, all right, if you're gonna do an HBO show, you're gonna do some nudity.
Yeah. So is there actually, I'm not really recalling it because I'm not binging through it right now. I'm just kind of like watching a new episode vaguely when it comes out. Is there a lot of nudity in The Boys? Because like I know there's definitely gratuitous violence that's like its signature. And I know there is some nudity and it's like kind of a lot of male nudity. I think they're definitely like making a statement with that. You know, they're
I
showing
agree
a
with
lot of
that.
dicks and balls.
I agree with that.
But because it definitely strikes me very differently than HBO nudity. It doesn't feel like it's gratuitous. They're not just throwing in sex scenes for the fun of it, but they are
Right.
showing a lot of dick and balls. You know.
Right. Well, there's also, do you remember the orgy episode?
I mean, I remember that there was an orgy. Take us through it.
Well, I mean, there's an orgy episode. They go to an orgy, and there's lots of orgy stuff happening in the background for most of the episode.
Which okay, so it's like a superhero orgy, right? Like, who are the
Yeah.
main characters in the orgy?
I
Why are
mean,
they going to?
it's a bunch of faceless people who are not point of view characters, and our protagonists go there because why do they go there? Two members of Payback are there, the TNT twins. They are
Ah,
hosting the orgy. So
that's
different
right.
characters
Okay.
have different reasons for being there. None of them are there for the orgy. It's just where the twins are, and there's like a plot thing around that.
Right. So
Also,
that's pretty gratuitously sexual.
yeah, and then there's also lots of uh what's her name? Stormfront.
Stormfront,
Uh
the
she's
Homelander's BFF.
yeah, so she's got a bunch of sex scenes with Homelander. Homelander has sex scenes with several people. I mean, there's some of the episodes, a bunch of the episodes start with, nudity, sexual content, yada yada. There is like it is kind of a big part of, as far as I'm concerned, it's a big part of the show.
Yeah.
And I do think you're right that there's everything that they do, there's commentary in everything that they do. Um, so, that to me makes it. And you're right, it's different from something like an HBO show where it's like, oh, here's some sex, for sex sake. And you can argue that that's not 100% the case for Boardwalk, but I feel like you can much more easily argue that that's not the point with The Boys. That being said, it's still there. I'm
Yeah.
still looking at naked people of both sexes, and whatever that is. And so
Right.
there's a part of me, and I've talked to you about this, I think, a little bit before. I'm kind of pretty strongly against that being a commonplace thing in entertainment, because to me, I think it's pretty important that actors can just be actors and not
Mhm.
have to be like one of these. There, when I was in school and I was studying all the old theater forms, I forget which one it was. There was one theater form, I think it was somewhere in Asia, where first of all, if you wanted your kid to have like a secure future, you would put them into theater, which is hilarious.
Oh God, wouldn't that be just amazing?
But also,
Why was that? I gotta research that if you don't have a deeper answer.
I don't have a really specific one, but it had to do with the structure of the society and the culture. It's this is at a time theater was always much more central than it is now, because now we have cinema and all the
Right.
different versions, all the different moving pictures. So as big as movies are now, that's the pinnacle of that was live theater for most of our existence.
Yeah.
And then for lack of a better word, the intelligentsia or whatever, the upper class folks at the end of a performance, if they wanted to, they could hire their favorite actors as prostitutes.
Right.
And so in the days in which we live, it can be hard to get a job if you're up for a job and they're like, okay, well, this job includes nudity and simulating sexual acts. And if you're like, well, I'm not going to show the world my naked body and I'm not going to simulate sexual acts, they can say, okay, well, thank you for coming down. And we have a million people who are ready to take your place who are willing to do those things. And I
Right.
think that, yeah.
It's very interesting that like we in this culture, like, you know, obviously the arts have always had a little bit of a reputation for like this is where the cutting edge sex stuff gets talked about, right? And I love your historical example of like, oh yeah, it used to be like a thing because it was like you go and you're, you know, you go, you perform on stage, and maybe you'll form a relationship with a rich and powerful person in society. So like being an actor or being in theater was a way to climb up society. You just have to do it with your genitals, you know?
Right.
And so there's still like we still have that a little bit. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's still this connection between sex work and acting, which kind of makes sense because I mean, I'm not saying like I support this and I want everyone to have to show their tits or whatever, but it does make sense to me because at its peak, art is, you know, supposed to is it's a form of human connection. Theater acting is a form of vulnerability, and what more connecting and vulnerable act is there than sex? And you know, yeah, that's just it's also a necessity. It's like something society will always want and need. So there is a value in sex. That's why, you know, they say prostitution is the oldest profession. Well, you know, in that way, is acting not the oldest profession?
That's interesting. Well, a couple of things. First of all, it was very intentional that I connected the two things and that I brought up that ancient theater form. I think it was in Japan. Um, and also, this is very reminiscent of something that you were saying in a message to me today about the zoo story about Jerry and his desire for human
Yes.
connection, and you know where sex falls in that sort of hierarchy or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that you know you have fantasy. You know it's a movie, for example. You watch a movie. Let's say it's an adventure. You know you live
Hmm.
vicariously through these characters and you want to be on this adventure, whether it's Batman or the Power Rangers or 007
Yeah.
or something that purports to be more sophisticated than any of the aforementioned, whatever it is,
Hmm.
like you want to come as close to that experience as possible. Part of that is if there's like a lead female, you fall in love with her
Yeah.
and 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 you want to then be intimate with her and introduce some nudity into that, and you're all the more close to that.
Yeah.
And so I again I come back to I am not interested in I've never been interested in being any kind of because we have what we call pornography, and then we
Hmm.
have what we call cinema and theater, and these are different things. Um, and it's important to me that those lines are pretty fucking opaque
Yeah.
because I've dreamed of being an actor my entire life. I started taking acting classes when I was a kid. I went to all the different acting schools and I've done all the things I've done in my life. It's a huge central part of my life. I have never aspired it to be any kind of pornographer, you know,
Hmm.
and it's kind of insulting is not the right word, damaging is not the right word. I was watching. Did I tell you about this? Um, who was I talking to about this? I I think I was exchanging messages with Mario. We were talking about I know a guy who was in a class with a very, very famous movie actor.
Mhm.
And this very famous movie actor was kind of real touchy-feely with this individual.
Okay.
And the way I heard this, I wasn't there. So this is a secondhand story, but the way it was told
Right.
to me was that this celebrity was making sort of like, advances sort of,
Yeah.
in the way where it's like you touch someone's leg instead of touching their shoulder or not touching them at all.
Yeah. They were
Um,
flirting a little bit.
and then afterward was interested in getting the student's number, and the
Mm.
student was just,
Ooh.
blinded by like, oh, he wants to exchange information with me. Maybe this is like a thing for my career. And I think people prey on that.
Yeah.
Uh, that's, I mean, this is an example of something a little bit different from, showing parts of your body on a screen, but there's connective tissue there between the, it's,
Yeah, because sex is this like power lever, in all relationships where sex is a possibility, depending on anyone, it's a power lever. And also and actors like in the ancient, probably Japanese theater form that you were talking about, actors were, they were on the pretty low end of the power spectrum, and so they
right.
used sex as a lever to climb up. In this scenario, it's like this person, this celebrity, who probably he or she himself, I'm sure had to, well, I mean, it's different if it's a male versus a female in this day and age, but there's definitely times when men are targeted sexually as well. Like there's this
Mhm.
power dynamic where the actor, the theater artist, is like at the bottom of this power dynamic, and it sounds to me like you are like wanting to really draw, like that's super important to you, like to draw a line and say like, hey, this can't be a part of the power dynamic relationship. We've seen how this has gone for however many millennia, and it ain't working out.
Well, I think that's part of it to make it, to make it into a larger, so the very first episode, one of the reasons I was ambivalent on The Boys is because one of the first things that happens is what happens between Starlight and the Deep.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like I don't know if I like this.
Yeah.
And that was
It's
one of
dark.
several things. Yeah, it was one of several things that to me I didn't. So I don't like the gratuitous nudity thing. I don't like the fact that she had to give a blowjob to climb that. But I get the commentary, and so I
Mhm.
appreciate that. It's one of those things we've talked about this where like I don't enjoy watching a thing or I don't enjoy reading a thing. It's like 1984. I didn't enjoy the experience of reading it, but I very much appreciate. Like I'm glad I read it.
Yeah.
I kind of hated reading large chunks of it, but
So you're
so yeah,
saying
then
The Boys is on the same cultural influence level as 1984? The Boys will go down historically as one of the most important TV shows of all time. Is that a declaration you're making right now?
I think it's written mostly from old manuscripts from Orwell. Um, Another thing, and I want to mention this in the same breath, the gratuitous violence, like that kind of put me off too a little bit. But again,
Yeah.
there's a commentary there, and also we live in a post Game of Thrones society
Yeah. Wow.
where, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like sex and uber violence, not uber violence like from what's it called, but like just extreme violence. That's like a thing that people are, they're huddling around the TV and watching
We're
these
used to now.
things. They're used to it. So part of it is I'm like, all right, I want to get with the program, but also I wouldn't watch it if it were those things for the sake of those things. I get
Mhm.
the commentary and I appreciate it, even though some of it is uncomfortable for me. I like it's a weird experience. It's like no other show. I got two seasons in where I was like, I really don't know if I like this, but
Mhm.
there was enough that I did like and that I was at least curious enough about that kept me coming back until I got to the beginning of the third season. I'm like, all right, I understand what this show is now. And I
Yeah.
know that there are things that are not going to agree with some of my sensibilities, but I'm enjoying going on this journey. And by this point, I'm invested in the characters, and I'm
Right.
sort of at temporary peace with some of the elements of it with which I have like an actual stance.
Yeah.
And just to go back to what you said about like the movement of making it not okay to, in feudal Japan, it was whatever it was, and now we have like Weinsteins and whatever. Just to put it in really practical terms, which I was kind of trying to do before, I remember this was toward the end of grad school. I forget what I was watching, but I saw something, and I think, oh, we had a conservatory hour with someone. I won't say the person's name. They were on an HBO show, and they were talking about how they had to kind of get over these things. Like, I was getting this big show, but I was going to have to do a lot of this stuff. It was a very sexual show.
Yeah.
And this person had to make a decision, like, do I want to advance my career, or do I want to kind of maintain, I won't say maintain my integrity, because I'm not trying to take it that strong stance. I'm just talking about the way I feel about this thing. But it occurred to me as I was coming out of grad school, so was my fiance, and wouldn't want her to be, I wouldn't want me to be faced with a decision like
Yeah.
that. And so I
Yeah.
just feel like it makes it harder for us that's such a, you know what I mean?
It does. It does. And I think like this is I don't know if this is a sharp left turn, but it's a bit of a left turn. This is another support for, I think we need to legalize sex work. Because if we legalize, like right now, you're not technically allowed to be a prostitute. You can be a bit like, but if it was like, hey, let's do, like, this is a thing that is part of society, and there is a strong line between that and just being, a pornographer, porn. How would we call it? A pornographer. I don't know, a porn actor, and then there's like actual, trying to make non-sexual art. And I'm not like looking down on sexual art at all. I mean, like, pornography is a cancer, and it's really bad for you in a lot of ways, but also it's like a completely obvious, like, of course that was going to happen once we got cameras. Like, probably the second picture taken all time was of a naked lady.
Yeah, but even without that, you can have that art form, call it an art form, call it whatever you want.
Yes.
I don't necessarily object to that having an existence. It's just that's not my art form.
That's
That's
not
something
exactly.
different, and it's important to me that they're separate.
Exactly. So my thesis here is that if we legalized prostitution, it would be easier to draw the lines and say, like, there's a clear line here because there's a clear pull where this is sex work. It's a legitimate thing. We know what it is. And this is not sex work. This is storytelling. And there's a genre in between, but that's not what we're trying to do up here. Not up here. I'm not trying to look down on people, but apparently I am, because this is the second time I've said I'm not trying to look down in the last 3 minutes. So apparently I'm looking down on someone.
Well, I think it's interesting what you just said about there being an art form in between the two, and maybe there being room for that. Here's the thing
Yeah.
that is entirely or almost entirely just about sex. And here's something that's not even remotely about that. And then here's your sort of, it used to be kind of like if you watch a movie on HBO after a certain time of day, you're going to get something that's a little different from what you'd be watching at 3 p.m. or whatever. And I feel like that has kind of disintegrated. And it's a easy like ratings grab. So it's the whole thing has gotten super blurred.
Right. Yeah, it definitely has. I don't know that. I think there will always be a blurred line, like, as long as, unless it's illegal to like put nudity, I think there's always going to be a blurred line, because there will always be people that are willing to,
Right, but what about there being a venue for that, and we give it a name, and we don't look down on it? It's like, this is this kind of thing, and I'm this kind of actor. I can sing, I can dance, I'm willing to simulate sex act, which is something separate from, like, I can't really dance, I can't really sing,
We definitely could, but then like, what's going to stop that? So let's call them a sex actor from also wanting to get a part on the boys. And like, if the boy, like, where, like, there a play? Like now, there's another subtlety. There's an art form. There's a wing of the art form. So it's like there. That's I kind of like. You're always going to have. It's just like you're always gonna, unless you like draw a hard line somewhere, was like any story involving sex or any story involving nudity is in this other genre. But how do you enforce that line when there's artists who will want to
Well,
participate on both sides of the line?
well, who knows what would really happen, but maybe what might happen would be that rather than having someone show parts of their body to get a foot in the door and then sort of graduating to things where they didn't have to do that so much anymore, you'd have to make a decision like, all right, am I going to be a part of this type thing or a part of that type thing? And not that you couldn't ever change, but if you did, it would be that you're making a change, like a crossover album or something for a musical
Hmm.
artist.
Yeah, right,
You know what I mean?
right.
There
Yeah,
are actors, like there are actors who it's like, okay, you've done nudity in this movie. Oh, you're doing nudity in this movie. Like there's some actors who do lots of nudity. And then
yeah.
there are actors who do some of it early in their career so that they can, bump it up into doing something else where they no longer have to do that. I mean, it challenges the entire system to suggest that you could do something differently, but
Yeah.
just because it is the way that it is doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way and that we couldn't try to, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, either way, I think we should all, try not to like scarlet letter people who do one thing or another, because, just like this extra blanket of shame isn't going to help the situation.
Or
Um,
maybe part of the problem is that it's just so commonplace. Maybe
right.
if it just weren't in almost everything.
I think it's a bit of a like a historical like I kind of view humanity as like a teenager with the internet. It's just like if you're getting well, like we're definitely how many we're definitely in the beginnings of the information age, the beginning of the internet age. Like I think it's pretty fair to think humanity is like a 13-year-old boy who's just
Hmm.
been who's just figured out the internet. Like, he got
Yeah,
the you know and so, of course, like everything we're going to want to look up is going to be like tits, sex, anal, things like that. We're a very immature species with a very powerful new toy right now. So
hmm,
hopefully, over the next handful of generations, and you see it in a lot of ways, like um, Gen Z. I don't know a whole lot about them, but like I feel like there's a lot of like anti-pornographer, anti-porn like I'm not going to say activists, but like lines of thinking in young that's like it catches on with younger generations, like hashtag no fap or whatever. Um, because they recognize like, hey, this like literally is ruining the sex lives of a generation of men just a little bit older from us. So maybe we shouldn't be victims of this like insanely predatory, addicting
right.
industry.
I mean, yeah. I mean, heard, that all makes sense to me. My fight is not really about that. I mean, it's obviously there are things there are things that connect it. But for example, you get this. I go back to my, you live vicariously through these characters. There's a hero, there's a love interest, and you identify with the hero and you fall in love with the love interest.
Yeah.
Then they're like, all right, do you want to see her tits? And we're like,
Yeah.
yeah, I love it. I
Yeah,
want
well,
to fuck
definitely
her,
want to see her tits, of course.
And
Yeah.
it's like maybe if it was a little harder to do that, but at this point, it's still the race is. I don't
Mm.
know who did it first, but one of them had to be first, unless the films were released on the same day. But like Scarlett Johansson did a film where she did incredibly all the nudity. And
Hmm.
around the same time, so did Jennifer Lawrence. And those
Right.
are two kind of, I don't know if they're directly in competition. Maybe they are for which roles they're, being looked at
Right.
for. But you see it all the time. What's her face? Um, it's funny because I was going to cite Christopher Nolan as one of the filmmakers who doesn't ever use nudity, but in Oppenheimer, what's her name? Florence Pugh. She
Oh,
was
that's
nude in
right.
that. And
Yeah.
then recently, not too long ago, she was nude in something else too.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, now we're doing that. Now you can see these people. Also, again, the 13-year-old with the internet thing. Like when I was a kid, if there was a film that had, what they used to call brief nudity,
Yeah.
which I haven't seen brief nudity before a show or a film in a long time. I don't think. Maybe they're still doing it. I haven't seen it, but like
Right.
you would have a thing where an actress would get out of the tub and you'd see her butt for like 5 frames, and that was
Right.
it. You know,
Oh, yeah. That
and
was what brief unity is. That's not like the for me, my first memory of nudity was Titanic and, Kate Winslet's breasts. But that's more than brief. Even though it wasn't like a gratuitously sexual scene, her tits were on camera for a while.
but here's my point: that in those days, like if you wanted to see that butt for more than a few frames, you had to go to Blockbuster, rent the film, pay money to see it on your
Mm.
TV, and when it got to that point, you had to hit pause on a VCR.
Right, at the exact moment.
But when you pause it, it looked like dog shit. Remember pausing a VHS tape?
Yeah.
So if you really, really wanted to see that actress's butt, you could, but it wasn't going to be great. You'd have to rent the film and you'd
Right.
have to, stare at this blurry moving image that if it stays paused for more than 60 seconds, the video stops.
Yeah.
And now if I want to see any actor who's ever done nudity, I just Google this actor nudity, and I can just comb through all of their nudity
Every like frame by
stills.
frame. Yeah.
Yeah, in high definition. I can go to a website and watch the scene as many times as I want, or I could just find a picture of it. Like, it's again what you're saying about this Wild West 13-year-old with the new technology. Like, the safeguards or it's just different. It's totally different.
It's a
And
totally different world.
it's not important enough to people who are getting cut checks to put up any guards around that. In fact, I'm sure it's a part of, like, a publicist is like, okay, so it's
Oh,
time for you to do nudity, and you do
right. Do you
nudity
think
in there.
Jennifer Lawrence's agent wasn't like, well, Scarlett Johansson is the it girl right now, and she just showed her tits in this show, in this, like, you should consider this offer.
I think that's exactly what happened. And then as soon as Scarlett Johansson heard about it, she was like, all right, well, I got to find like some excuse to do it too, because I
Yeah,
can't lose
exactly. ground. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
It's like uh it's like what we're doing with Russia, except for with boobies. Nuclear
That's a
armament with tits.
that's a very Gayevian thing to say.
Gayevian. I do like Gayevian. I was
We
gonna
should
make some sardonic joke to transition us to another topic, but then I forgot what it
let's
was.
oh we should transition. By the way, we should sell water Gayevian.
We should sell what? We should sell water Gayevian?
Water, bottled water, and the brand is Gayevian.
Oh, I see what you did there, Gayevian.
It's a really bad joke, all right?
It's a very good bad joke.
I'm not above it either. I think
Um,
it's a good time for a transition. You remember what you were gonna transition?
no, I do not. I don't at all remember. But
What's the
I
relationship between transistor and transition? Can you monologue for a minute, by the way?
yeah, I can actually. You just reminded me of something that I was going to talk about on the topic of seeing like the quality of nudity back in the day. You'd have to like go rent the thing and pause the thing and just like see it was like terrible quality. Um, I think probably my first experience seeing a naked woman was like we had like basic cable, but if you like went up to the high channels, sometimes you would get the the blacked out version of the sex channels or HBO or whatever it was, and it was just like way worse than like a VCR on reverse. It was like mostly black and like pixelated oranges and greens and purples, and it was doing the squiggly thing, and you weren't getting any sound or anything like that. But like that's like that was my introduction to pornography as like a 11-year-old or whatever. That was my first. That's how I started well, not started. I guess technically I started my relationship with the female breast at a much younger age, but that was like the beginnings of things happening, puberty, pre-puberty even.
I
And then just a
remember that.
couple years later, you were able to download pictures of girls naked.
Yeah, it's crazy. So what you would do, I remember the first thing I heard was somebody would talk about like how to get the pay-per-view sexy
Yes.
channels is you just keep hitting the channel over and over again, and I didn't know what they meant. And then later I heard of a more sophisticated version of this because there was there was a button. There was a button on the remote, and it was recall. And if you hit the recall button, it'll cycle through recent channels. And there was also a cancel or delete button. So what you
Okay.
would do is you would go to one of those scrambled channels, and then you would hit recall, and it would bring you to other channels you'd been to. And every time you get to a channel you've been to, you hit cancel or delete so it doesn't come up on recall until the only one that was left was the scrambles channel, because there's a hot second before the scrambler kicks in, right when you go to the channel and you see a weird scrambly pink and green version of what's on there. And if you just keep hitting recall over and over and over again, you get a weird scrambly pink and green version of some softcore porn.
So you spam the recall button with your left hand and jerk yourself off with your right hand, and that's just
Something like
the
that.
experience of being a 12-year-old boy in 1996 or whatever year it was.
That's what I'm saying. That's in our lifetime.
That's in our life. It's crazy, man. That's in our, and actually to come back to what we were talking about earlier with the Albee play and Jerry, the connection between sex work and the underground culture, and it makes me think of the pornography playing cards, because even a few years before 1996 or whenever at the beginning of our lifetime, like even that would have been mind blowing to Jerry, just having
Right.
this. Well, maybe not, because I guess there was television at the time, so maybe that wasn't so much. But even then, like, it was definitely easier. Probably even at the beginning of our lifetime, it would have been easier for us to buy a dirty pack of cards than
Mm-hmm.
to see female nudity on a screen. And now I could literally be looking at pornography right now and also be talking to you.
Yeah, you could picture in a picture some pornography, which is maybe the title of this episode.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
exactly. I was in high school, and I bought a magazine.
You bought, yeah. Oh, I've never bought a magazine. I only just like snuck the ones from my, older cousins or whatever.
Well, I grew up in New York City, and I was in Manhattan, and I went to Penn Station to get the railroad home, and I went to the newsstand. And it was at the newsstand. It was in between Guns and Ammo and
Wow.
whatever
They do
else.
not sell guns and ammo in Manhattan anymore. That's for sure.
I mean, it's everything is different now, but this is not that long ago. You talked about the evolution of certain things just being exponential. So I mean, I guess in a way it is a really long time ago, but it doesn't feel like that long ago. Like
It
I didn't
does.
go to high school in the stone. I didn't go in the during the Bronze Age.
Yeah. Yeah. What year did you graduate high school? 2000, like, 2 or 2001?
2001.
2001. You were a senior during 9/11. That's crazy, man. Jesus.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's another thing that's not what we're going to transition for. And I feel like we're actually creeping up on an hour. So I don't know if we have transition time into two more topics, but that's another thing we could definitely talk about is, I mean, it would be so fun and hilarious to talk about, the experience of being a 17, 18-year-old kid in New York City, like when 9/11 happened. And I was like, 14-year-old, I don't know how old I was, yeah, 14, 15, I guess, like carpooling to work in Colorado and like having no idea like what the fuck was happening while you can like smell the towers, man. That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a whole other huge thing. Did we, and maybe we'll save that, or are we creeping up on an hour already?
I think so. It's 10:14, and I remember saying at 9:15 that I would have an hour to like I would have 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes. So I think we talked a little bit. Yeah, so we're probably like 45 minutes to an hour. I don't know. I didn't look at no, we're not that sophisticated on it's not about the whiskey. We're just recording on Zoom.
Well, if that amount of time went by, it's because the conversation was stimulating. I hope it will be
Honestly,
stimulating for a listener.
I think this one's gonna do pretty well. I mean, pretty well being like I think the most listeners we've had is 18. So yeah, we'll see. But I would tune into this shit.
We had some interesting stuff we touched on tonight.
Definitely have.
So where are we at? Should we wrap it up and do like a debrief, or should we bring up another?
Nah, let's wrap it up and do a debrief. I like that idea. I feel like let's land the plane hard. And so actually, I have a couple of friends who podcast, and what they do is at this point, like when they want to get a little more casual, they end the episode and then they just keep recording for another hour or however long. And then it's called the Afterglow, and that's the subscribers only. So we can go to subscribers only time, except for we probably won't record it.
Yeah, whatever you think.
All right, well, why don't we toast out?
Let's toast out.
All right, here's to subscribing, pornographing, and acting.
Well, if you subscribe, may you subscribe to our podcast.
And if you pornograph, may you pornograph safely and consensually.
And what was the third one? Acting? If you act.
And if you act, remember Sam Jenkins.
It's not about the whiskey.
It's not about the whiskey. Sláinte. All right. Peace and love.
Okay.
Okay.